Hello and welcome to our Year 2 Mastery recording for T-Level Health. In this session we're going to be focusing on Inside the Mark scheme for Assignment 1 in the T-Level Health. Context will be in relation to all occupational specialisms and will not impact your understanding or application in this event if you deliver any of the occupational specialisms. So in this session we'll do 5 things. We're going to explore what each task is asking for, where marks typically sit, and how the 4 tasks connect as a single clinical reasoning journey. We're going to explore the mark scheme and performance outcomes. We'll translate band descriptors into plain teachable language so you can brief learners with confidence and design checkpoints against those expectations. We will identify common pitfalls and the teaching strategies that can prevent them. I'll show you the most frequent errors and precisely how to coach them out, especially around justification and use of standard tools. Throughout, we will be comparing pass and distinctions. We'll look at the changes in the students' thinking and writing so you can model what good looks like. And we will also explore planning for improved delivery in term 1 and 2, where you can leave with a concrete set of routines, such as micro-activities, quick checks and learner tools that you can start using. So let's begin with an assessment overview. So assignment 1 is made up of 4 tasks totaling 80 marks and mapping to multiple performance outcomes. It's completed under supervised conditions with no internet and authenticity must be verified. The evidence is externally marked and moderated, so clarity and alignment to expectations are essential. The tasks mirror real-world clinical reasoning. So task 1 will be the assessment of the patient or situation. So students gather and interpret information, identify risks and justify their assessment using recognised tools or guidelines. Task 2 will be on goals or patient outcomes or planned outcomes. So in some OSs this is SMART goal setting, and others it's planned and patient outcomes. Either way, outcomes must flow from the assessment and be monitorable. Task 3 is the care or treatment or support plan. This translates assessment into safe specific action, so what, when, how or who, when monitoring, and multidisciplinary team or MDT roles. Task 4 is the evaluation monitoring effectiveness or clinical effectiveness. So students must judge what worked, define indicators and frequency, and state how findings will change the plan. So think of the 4 tasks as assess, plan outcomes, plan care or treatment, evaluate and adjust. We're teaching a cycle, not just 4 isolated pieces. So let's begin with our first assessment breakdown. So you will find throughout the breakdown of all of the assessment a very clear structure. This will go through looking at what distinction would look like, different ways that you can assess and scaffold students' understanding of the marking criteria, common pitfalls, and then teaching strategies used throughout a 24-week timeline. So beginning with assessment 1. So for band 4, so what the task is looking for is 5 things. Completeness and accuracy, so all required information is captured, recorded correctly and interpreted against expected norms or reference values. Interpretation supported by evidence, so the learners don't just report numbers, they explain what numbers mean for this patient and reference the appropriate standardised tool or guidelines where relevant. Synthesis across sources, so strong responses bringing findings together, so for example observation plus screening plus patient history to identify both physical and psychological risks. It reads like joined up reasoning, not separate lists. And justified conclusions, so conclusions are specific and explicitly justifies. Because News 2 shows X and their fluid chart trends shows Y, the immediate risk is, therefore the safe next step is. So band 4 literacy, this response also needs to be tightly focused, use precise clinical language, follows a logical structure, so intro, analysis, justified conclusion, and is essentially error-free. So for example, When you demonstrate this to learners, narrate the because therefore chain. For example, because the MST score has increased and weight has dropped over 2 weeks, therefore malnutrition risk is rising. Escalate to dietetics and start food or fluids monitoring today. This single sentence shows assessment, interpretation and justified action. And that covers that criteria that we're looking for on the left here in the band 4 and more detailed example on the distinction level on the right. So there are some common pitfalls. First is incomplete or inaccurate documentation. So missing fields, wrong terms, or inconsistent detail makes the whole piece sort of unsafe. Incorrect or missing calculations. So if a scoring tool is used incorrectly, the downstream decision making is compromised. Weak interpretation of findings. Here are the results, for example, but with no clinical meaning or implications. Escalations are unclear or unjustified, so actions are not linked to policy or guidance and the rationale is missing. Over-reliance on generic statements, so language doesn't link findings to this patient. Omitting risk considerations, no sense of consequence if they don't act. Data listed without implications, so results presented but not converted into risks or next steps. And finally, no use of standardized tools or guidelines, so rationale isn't anchored to recognized standards, so decision lacks justified linkage. So what we need to do is build a finding to meanings to action sentence stem in every practice. The because, therefore, so I will. We can run calculation drills with timed accuracy checks and peer marking against the tool rules. And use a policy anchor line such as this escalation is in line with, so name the guidance and policy, and then convert generic statements by forcing a patient-specific tag, such as for this patient, this matters because. So now let's explore some tools to support measuring progress. So here on the left is a simplified mark scheme. So it's short, teachable descriptors for bands 1 to 4. And again, these are quite generic. It's pulled out the key assessment language that is valid across all OSCs, and all that's been removed is kind of the context of the occupational specialism. So you can add to this and adapt this so you can make it more OS context. So you can use it to set success criteria before writing and to frame feedback after. So it can have phrases, the upgrades such as to move from band 2 to band 3, add such and such, or a clear link from your findings to specific risks and the immediate next steps. Next we have a traffic lights rubric. So again, this is making the system, the marking criteria, more accessible for your students. What you'll find is green aligns to band 4 features such as complete, accurate, synthesized, justified with standards, focused and coherent. Amber spans band 2 to 3, so some good elements but links or monitoring or justifications are partial or generic. And red signals band 1 risk, so descriptions without interpretation, inaccuracies or unsafe supported steps. Use it for RAG feedback in class. Peer marking, spot check 1 criterion, so for example justification with a standard. And finally we have the student self-assessment tool that you can use. So this mirrors the rubric language, so the students learn the mark scheme vocabulary while self-checking. So you can build a 5-minute routine, so students tick the checklist, circle 1 upgrade and rewrite 1 paragraph implementing it. So for example, add indicators and monitoring frequency. You can use this on a weekly cycle, 10 to 50 minutes. Use it as a mini task for like task 1 dataset, peer rag, self-check, and use for 1 upgrade. So track class trends as well. So if most are ambers, for use these standards to justify, set a micro teach on that strand next lesson. So now let's explore how you can build and scaffold your students for task 1. And for all the way through, as I mentioned, I will also show you an example for all the other tasks, so that what you can do is look at bringing them together and building performance for each individual task as they go on. So in the first half of the term, the focus is building the essential skills learners need for task 1. So you begin in weeks 1 and 2 by introducing assignment 1 and clarifying documentation requirements. This ensures students know exactly what's expected and can use the correct terminology consistently. Weeks 3 and 4, you can shift to accuracy, so recording observations correctly and practicing calculations, using scoring tools, identifying common errors early. In weeks 5 to 7, we move into interpretation skills. Learners practice linking findings to evidence, interpreting results accurately and connect them to normal parameters and benchmarks so they can justify their decisions with clarity. On the right, those assessment links, the acronym there that I have is MS, is mark scheme. So using the mark scheme to support assessment links. And then finally, the acronym GSEM, so GSEM, that is the graded standard student exemplars that are on the support materials tab of the website. So just so that we're aware of all the acronyms that are being used. So in the second half of term 1, this is really building those foundations and applying them in a realistic context. So weeks 8 and 9 focus on escalation principles and risk awareness, exploring when and why escalation is needed and the consequences of not acting. By week 10, we're looking to integrate all elements into a mock scenario using Band 4 criteria as the benchmark. Weeks 11 and 12 will tackle those common pitfalls, encouraging peer review and small group work to correct weaker responses. Week 13 and 14, students can use the traffic light self-assessment tools to identify gaps and take part in targeted revision, strengthening any weaker areas before moving into term 2. So the second half of term 2 focuses on applying skills under realistic assessment conditions. So week 6 will be a full mock run through of task 1, for example, with feedback mapped directly into GSEM bands. Week 7 addresses error analysis, helping students identify any sort of common mistakes. And week 8, they complete a high pressure time practice. Week 9 is centered on self-assessment criteria, and week 10 is that final preparation. So week 1 to 5 will be different for all of these assessments. It's that refreshment in week 1, moving through the different final stages to document accuracy, calculations, or timed calculations, interpretations. But what you'll find in all of these tasks, the final sort of 4 weeks is that full mock, then analysing, reviewing common errors, doing a high pressure practice of a task, doing some self-assessment, and then the final preparation. So you'll find that theme quite common across all of these tasks. So now moving on to assignment 2. So again, we've got a breakdown of the banding criteria and what to look for in those higher levels so that you know how to scaffold your students up. So band 4, you're looking for 4 things. We're looking for relevance and measurability. Every goal or outcome must tie directly to the information provided, be measurable and sit within a realistic time frame. Next, we have prioritisation. Aims are sequenced logically by urgency and importance, not in the order they popped into the learner's head. Third, it's that explicit linkage to assessment with criteria for success and a monitoring methods. So that's indicators, for example, ADL performance or MST score trend, a time frame and how progress will be checked. Fourth, justification, why these procedures or interventions are required and how they will lead to the planned outcomes, using duty of care and an evidence base. And then again, band 4 writing is tight and clinical, focused, coherent, precise terminology and explicit reasoning. So let's explore common pitfalls with task 2. Occurring issues are unclear or vague goals, so the wording isn't specific or measurable, so we can't tell what success would look like. Goals are not relevant. The goals don't flow from the information given, it's disconnected from the identified needs. Unrealistic or unachievable targets. Targets ignore the time frame or the context, so they can't be met within the assessment window. Poor prioritisation. The ordering doesn't reflect urgency or importance. The most pressing needs aren't addressed first. Weak justification. There's a goal but no reasoning or evidence to support why it's the right goal. Procedures started without outcomes. So a procedure is named, but there's no planned outcome, no indicators, and no review point to judge if it worked. Outcomes are not traceable to assessment. So the link back to the original finding is weak. It isn't clear, which means the outcomes respond to. So again, we've got an example tools that you can use. So first of all, the simplified mark scheme. So the band 4 row summarise what excellent looks like for this task. So goals, outcomes that are relevant, clear and measurable, realistic with time frame, logically prioritised and explicitly linked to the assessment. It also expects criteria for success, so indicators, time frame and monitoring method, plus justification that explains why the chosen procedure lead to those outcomes. The writing is focused, coherent and uses precise clinical terminology. Whereas band 3 shows mostly there, generally relevant and clear, broadly achievable, prioritisation mostly clear, and linkage to assessment present but uneven. Indicators or timeframe present but not consistent, and justification that's sound but not fully developed. Band 2 pairs back further, so this is a loose connection to assessment, vague indicators, limited rationale. With band 1 describe work that is unclear, not measurable or achievable, poor prioritisation, not linked to assessment and missing indicators. Again, we have this then brought down into a traffic lights rubric system that mirrors that top row, with the relevance of information, measuring words with a time frame, measurable wording within a time frame, so that's your green band 4. Amber is sitting in those sort of bands 2 and 3, so partial coverage, some relevance, and then red, band 1 or 0, so flags the absence of these elements, are vague or unrealistic. And finally, again, we have a student self-assessment checklist, again, that reflects those traffic light rubrics up to the banding criteria, and that allows the students in a more directed way understand whether or not they've met the criteria successfully. So again, we have a bit of an assessment timeline that you can use in your teaching and delivery. So in the first half term, the focus is on building, again, that strong foundation for task 2. We start by unpacking the mark scheme so learners understand exactly what band 4 looks like. Weeks 2 to 4, build relevance, measurability and achievability, ensuring goals are realistic and set within time frames. Week 5 to 7 is focusing on linking goals directly to patient needs, prioritising them logically and justifying choices with evidence. This staged approach ensures learners can move from understanding the theory to applying it in context. The second half of term 1 moves into more complex and applied skills, so learners explore multi-factor goals, identifying correct common errors, and practice creating goals for sample cases. Peer assessment is introduced to encourage critical evaluation against band criteria. The term ends with a timed practice self-assessment using the traffic light tool and targeted improvement activities, so learners can address individual weaknesses before moving on. So term 2 focuses on consolidation and high pressure performance. We start with a recap of criteria, then sharpen goal writing skills under time pressure. Prioritisation and justification are reinforced, followed by full mock task 2 attempts with peer feedback. Later weeks target the error analysis, speed and accuracy and peer review cycles, and we finish with the self-assessment and final targeted revision, ensuring learners are fully prepared for assessment conditions. We're now moving on to task 3 of assignment 1, which is the care, treatment or support plan task. So again, we're going to explore on the screen what we're looking for from a Band 4 criteria. So this is based on that marking criteria from the mark schemes. So what we've got on the left again is what we're looking for, and the example at a distinction level in a bit more detail on the right. But overall, what we're looking for are features such as alignment and sufficiency. So every element is directly addresses an identified need and contains enough detail for safe, accurate delivery. There is consistency with best practice and guidance. Treatment specificity, so what, when, how, who for each intervention, for example, frequency, device settings, documentation. Risk and monitoring is embedded with a clear MDT roles, who does what and when and how will escalate. Again, Band 4 literacy is focused, coherent, precise terminology, explicit evidence-based reasoning. So these are the common recurring issues that we see with Task 3. So plans are not aligned to needs. So key interventions are missing or relevant actions have been included. So the plan doesn't address the identified risks. Insufficient details. Instructions are too vague. To deliver safely, timings, frequencies or settings aren't stated. Next, ignoring best practice. So steps don't reflect recognised guidance or accepted standards. Omissions in risk or monitoring. Hazards and checks aren't identified, so there's no way to know if the plan is working or safe. Generic approach. The plan isn't tailored to the scenario or patient. Wording is broad rather than case specific. Support plans without treatment detail. So care is described at a high level but lacks the what, when, how, who needed for delivery. Monitoring and roles unclear, so no schedule or measures are named. MTT responsibilities and escalation triggers aren't defined. So again, let's explore these tools that we can use to help support that scaffolded understanding and meeting of the assessment criteria. So for Band 4, we're really expecting a plan that is fully relevant to the information, with all elements appropriate to the identified needs. It contains sufficient detail for accurate and safe delivery, is consistent with best practice guidance, shows treatment specificity, so what, when, how, who, embeds risk and monitoring with escalation points, with clear MDT roles. The writing is focused, coherent and precise, with explicit evidence-based reasoning and negligible errors. Whereas Band 3 is appropriate overall, but shows gaps in specificity or partial alignment to best practice. Risk controls are mostly sound. Band 2 is more generic, missing treatment steps, weak monitoring and or unclear rules. Feasibility is uncertain. Band 1 is largely absent or unsafe. Treatment, monitoring and roles are missing or incorrect, and risks aren't adequately managed. Structure and accuracy are weak. So again, we have a traffic light rubric system that you can use within your teaching and delivery. So that mirrors again the criteria on the left, and then mirrors down to the different bands below, so Band 3, Band 2. So we're moving from excellent to developing to at risk. And then finally, we have a checklist that makes it very clear for students to self-assess. So reflect those expectations in the criteria, so the plan is relevant, elements match the needs, there is enough detail for safe and accurate delivery, it aligns with current best practice, treatment, not just support, is specified with who does what and when, monitoring frequencies and escalation triggers are included, and the write-up is focused, precise and low errors. So again, we've created here a little bit of an assessment schedule, an formative assessment. So in term 1, we start by unpacking the Band 4 criteria, just like the other tasks, so that students really understand what excellence look like. They move through to identifying the relevance of plan elements, getting students to compare relevant versus irrelevant intervention. Week 3 and 4 focus on building detail and aligned to best practice, encouraging clear specific instructions and matching interventions to recognised guidelines. In week 5, learners practice identifying risks and monitoring requirements, which is crucial for safe delivery. Week 6 looks at tailoring plans to different patient contexts for personalised approach. And Week 7 closes the first half term by analysing incomplete or flawed plans to highlight common omissions. The second half of term 1, the focus shifts to developing and integrating all elements of the plan. Week 8 covers monitoring requirements, with learners creating practical monitoring schedules. Week 9 brings everything together as they write a complete plan for sample case. Week 10 introduces peer assessment, again using the Band 4 criteria to promote critical thinking. And Week 11 applies a role play element, allowing students to test how clearly their plan can be followed in practice. Week 12 and 13 provide timed practice under assessment conditions and self-assessment using the traffic light rubric. And finally, Week 14 focuses on targeted improvement, with learners working on their specific gaps to prepare for Term 2. So in Term 2, again, the aim is to refine and reinforce skills ahead of final assessment. Week 1 starts with a quick recap of the criteria, followed by detail and clarity drills in Week 2 to sharpen written communication. Week 3 updates learners on best practice guidance and ensures their plans align with current standards. Week 4 revisits risks and monitoring with fresh case examples. And then again, we move into those final few weeks where it moves from mocks to timed challenges, peer feedback, self-assessment, and focusing on then finally remaining skill gaps to ensure readiness for the live assessment. And so finally, our final task 4, evaluation, monitoring, effectiveness or clinical effectiveness. So what does this mean again for Band 4? So it's about the relevance and evidence. The evaluation uses all relevant information and backs points with objective evidence. Strengths sit alongside precise constructive areas for improvement. Actionable recommendations align to best practice and feasible in context. A defined monitoring framework, indicators, tools, frequencies, review points, thresholds, and how updates will change the plan. Balance coverage across ADLs where relevant with evidence-based next steps and monitoring cadence. And again, Band 4 literacy, it focuses on that coherent, precise terminology, explicit reasoning. So let's explore those common pitfalls for task 4. So evaluation is too general. Comments aren't tied to the actual plan or context, so they don't help decision making. Evidence is absent or weak, so points are made without data or clear reasoning to support them. No identification of strengths or weaknesses. The appraisal isn't balanced. Opportunities for improvements are missed. Unrealistic recommendations. Actions proposed aren't feasible in the circumstances. Recommendations are not aligned to best practice, so standards or guidelines aren't referenced or reflected. Recommendations lack monitoring detail, so indicators, tools, frequency, review points or thresholds aren't specified. And finally, feasibility, not evidence. So proposals aren't checked against resources, competence or policy, and it's unclear how findings will change the plan. So again, we have the simplified mark scheme that you can explore and use in your own delivery, which Band 4 showing that fully relevant to the evaluation is fully relevant to the provided information, uses evidence effectively to support points, clearly identifies strengths and areas for improvement, recommendations are appropriate, achievable and aligned with best practice or guidance. A monitoring framework is defined, indicators, tools, frequencies, review points and threshold. The writing is focused, coherent and precise with explicit evidence-based reasoning and negligible errors. And then again, we have a traffic light rubrics that you can use within your delivery so the students really understand in a little bit more detail all the different elements that they need to meet to go from excellent in green, developing or in amber and at risk in the red. And then finally, we have the student self-assessment tool, which mirrors those expectations highlighted in the traffic light rubrics and the simplified mark scheme. So let's focus again on the 24 weeks of some teaching strategies. So in term 1, our approach to task 4 starts by unpacking the band 4 descriptors again, so learners fully understand what high level evaluation looks like. In week 2, we move to recognising what's relevant in an evaluation versus what's just filler. This helps them avoid going off topic, ensures every point ties back to the plan. Week 3 focuses on using evidence effectively, not just making claims, but backing them up with facts, data, or professional guidance. Week 4 encourages balanced appraisals, making sure strengths are highlighted alongside areas of improvement. Week 5, we work on developing achievable recommendations, and in week 6, ensuring those recommendations are aligned with best practice. By week 7, learners are reviewing example evaluations, critiquing weak responses, and identifying what makes stronger examples stand out. The second half of term 1 shifts towards structured application. So week 8 introduces frameworks for structured evaluation writing, helps learner organise their responses logically. Week 9 links the evaluation back to the original goals set earlier in the assessment, reinforcing continuity between tasks. Week 10 uses peer assessment so learners can see and critique each other's work. Week 11 brings in case study practice to apply the full evaluation process in realistic scenario. Week 12 and 13 focuses on time practice and self-assessment using the traffic light tool, helping learners manage time and reflect on quality. And then finally, before Christmas, week 14 targets individual areas for improvement, so learners strengthen weak spots before moving into term 2. So term 2 again is all about the consolidation and refinement. Week 1 revisits the evaluation criteria for a refresher, with week 2 drills evidence integration skills with short focused exercise. Week 3 reinforces balanced appraisal, while week 4 refines recommendations to ensure they are both achievable and relevant. And then finally, week 5 to 10 is following that process with all the other tasks, where you're doing the mock task, error analysis, time short practice, peer feedback loop, self-assessment, and a final review. So as we come to the end of this recording, I'd like to make a moment to reflect on some common themes and share some really key resources and events that are coming up for year 2. So before I want to wrap up, I want to highlight the most common focus areas that have been causing students to lose marks across the task. So first, we often see care plans with limited or vague patient-specific detail. The work feels generic rather than tailored to the scenario. Similarly, goals are sometimes not clearly linked to the activities of daily living or to the scenario context, which weakens their relevance. Risk prevention measures are another sticking point. Too often they're overly generic and not supported by evidence. We also see a lack of justification for recommendations and next steps, meaning the reasoning behind decisions aren't clear or convincing. Finally, monitoring and evaluation plans are sometimes weak, missing, or not linked to the initial goals. So how can we support students in improving these areas? One strategy is to explicitly model linking patient scenarios directly to EDLs in their written work. Using exemplar MDT tables can also be very effective. Placing high and low quality responses side by side makes the difference visible. We can also break down justification into clear evidence-based sentence stems and provide structured templates for monitoring and evaluation plans. RAG or sandbox activities can help students practice prioritising care recommendations. Finally, we can implement tools like the traffic light rubrics for moderation, discussion, self-assessment checklists that focus on using scenario detail and criteria language, and simplified mark schemes for classroom modelling. Together, these approaches will help close those common gaps and support learners in moving towards higher band performance. So this is the T-Level Health Year 2 Mastery series of events that we've got upcoming. So we've just had our first event on the 8th of October, which this is a recording of that session. On the 15th of October, we have the ETF Route Exchange Network, which is also focusing on Year 2. We have Chief Examiner Insights and bite-sized recordings, which are already out on our YouTube channel, on our YouTube playlist. In November the 26th, we have a face-to-face session which will have industry speakers and myself. This will be in Manchester, and it'll be a really great session to hear from industry speakers, but also have almost 2 hours with me where we're doing an assignment to planning surgery as well. Then in December we have all of the assignments. So assignment 1, 2 and 3, I will be publishing recordings on these onto our YouTube playlist. And then finally in term 2, we have our final year 2 event, which is helping for the final 2 months from feedback to improvement for assignment 3. So really help focusing on how we can get the students really prepared for the final assignment in June. Throughout this whole academic year, I have drop-in clinics every month, so please do join me on these sessions with any questions that you have. So how can you access this? So this is our YouTube playlist, so you can just we have the link here, or you can look for NCFE YouTube channel, go to playlist and scroll down until you find the T-level health one. We also have our T-level events page, so again you can utilise the link, or if you just search for NCFE T-level events and webinars, you'll be able to access all of the links to all of those events that I mentioned earlier. And for the materials that were highlighted in today's session, we have on the support materials is where the student exemplars sit, and also the graded student exemplars. It's where the assessment materials will be past papers and the chief examiner report, and in teaching materials is schemes of work and free teaching materials as well. So I would really appreciate if you could give your feedback on today's session. So this is the QR code, so you can scan that with your phone, or alternatively you can click on the link which is in the description of this YouTube video and put in the title T-level health year 2 mastery inside the mark scheme assignment 1, and then share any feedback that you have on this. Your input really helps us refine our training and make sure future sessions are as relevant and as useful as possible. So thank you for your time today. I hope you leave with some clear practical strategies to support your learners in achieving the best. Please do make use of some of the strategies highlighted, and remember, small consistent changes in delivery can make a big difference to learner outcomes. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you at some of our future sessions. Thank you.